I grew up in a very small mountain town of less than 1,000 people. We had many creepy stories children shared around, some silly, like a creepy snake monster in the school toilet, and some with more history to them, like skinwalkers. In fact, the town is very close to the Navajo Reservation and Navajo ruins. I had a native friend in middle school who told me one was after her. She wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but she was so scared she ended up telling some of her friends anyway. She's fine now in case anyone had wondered. This story is a bit in between those two in terms of legitimacy, but it was weird. In middle and elementary school, it was common for kids to go to the high school football games, as there wasn't really much else to do. The football field was surrounded by woods, and kids had a story about a witch that lived in them. You supposedly were not allowed in the woods, because it was someone else's property, but there wasn't anything there like a house, and we never were told who lives there, so of course kids went in anyway. If you walked into the woods a bit, you could find an area the witch supposedly went sometimes. It was a semi-cleared out area in the field of trees, far enough in that you couldn't see the football field through the trees, but could easily find your way back. There's an old decrepit shed there, borderline falling into a ditch, and many broken glass bottles lying around, but that's about it. This particular day, my parents dragged me to the game, and another kid and I decided to go into the woods to cure our boredom. We waited till the game got busy and no one was looking, then headed into the trees. There was somewhat of a path, but we still needed to duck under and push branches out of the way the whole walk. When we reached the clearing, there was still the same old building falling apart and shards of glass everywhere, but a few other things I hadn't seen before in the times I went there. First off, there were some children's school chairs, the cheap plastic kind, in different colors, and some were sun-bleached. They sat in a circle in the middle of the clearing. Then, there were also a few socks from like a baby or a toddler, somewhat similar in size to each other, but clearly from different pairs, and they just laid scattered on the ground. All of this was weird, but still fun, spooky things, so we looked around a bit longer. That's when we found an old axe on the ground, like very old looking. I don't think it had been used for cutting wood anymore. That kind of old. Then there was some dried blood on it? Or paint? I really hope it was paint. Either way, it freaked us out, so we left. You'd think that'd be the end of it, but no. Apparently we felt the urge to go right back in there. This time we took a slightly different path. On the way in, we found a cat. It was dead. I couldn't tell the color. It was like I had on night vision goggles, but everything was a different shade of tan and orange instead of green. It laid there with its mouth wide open, like it was screaming at us. And despite being dead, its eyes were even more bright and reflective than most living cats. They were open as wide as possible and just staring, looking both terrified and terrifying. There was no evidence of its cause of death, no visible injuries that we could see, and it didn't look especially old. It didn't even have a smell. At that point, we just left. I never returned to those woods, and I still wonder what was going on there. Maybe I should go back. I don't really know where to post this, so I thought I would start here and see. So please excuse the spelling and the way the story is written. I'm not much of a storyteller. For reference, I'm a 40-year-old something male from the South. What happened to me yesterday and the past 4 Sundays has my whole belief system upside down. I am a Southern Baptist Christian, and this is the story that happened to me starting 4 weeks ago. I do overnight security part-time on the weekends, and everything was going normal until 3 hours before I had to get off. So at 5 o'clock Sunday morning, the phone rings, and it's the guy who relieves me at 7 every weekend morning. We'll call him Todd. Todd.
Hey bud, I'm gonna be a couple hours late this morning due to car trouble.
Me.
Alright, just get here as soon as you can.
Now this just threw my whole day apart. I knew I wouldn't have the time to make it to church, for I normally like to go home to take a shower and change clothes first. See, I work an hour and a half from where I live and then another 30 minutes to my church. It's okay. I'll just go to the night service, I thought. Well, at 7 a.m., Todd showed up just like he had said. I left work to just go home. About 4 miles from where I work, I saw the sign. To Christ Community Church, 6 miles this way. The arrow was pointing to the left. So I thought, why not? Church is church, right? What I pulled up to was just jaw-dropping to me. The church looked as if it had just been built, and the parking lot looked as if it had just been poured, and there was a small graveyard out back. I went in and enjoyed the service, and then afterwards the pastor came up to me. We'll call him Paul. But what was weird is everyone else stayed where they were. Me and Pastor Paul talked like we were old friends for about 15 minutes, and then he stated that he had a business meeting the next morning, but he did ask me to come back the next Sunday. Well, the next Sunday rolled around, and I did return, and this time the church members were a lot more inviting. They all would gather around me to shake my hand and ask me if I was going to join them. This kept happening until today. And see, my pastor from my church called me this morning asking if we could meet for lunch. We'll call him Gary. Gary, we have missed you so much in church. Is everything all right? So I broke down and told Gary everything. The look I got was really surprising. Gary, we can't keep you if you decide to go to another church, but you haven't been going to Christ Community Church. Me. Yes, I have. They're really good there. And I'm not leaving my church for them, just visiting. Gary, it's impossible for you to go to that church. An earthquake happened and a sinkhole opened up and killed all that were there in 1908. Please, tell me what I should do. When I first got my dog, I was obsessed with taking her out on little hike journeys through the woods across the street from my house. She was a husky and German shepherd mix, and all black, so when it got dark it became a bit harder to see her, but I didn't mind. One night I decided to stay out and walk with her a bit longer despite it being so dark. I can't see anything in front of me, and I have to use the flashlight on my phone just to avoid logs and thick fallen branches. Everything is fine until she disappears from the circle of light, venturing beyond what is visible to me. I wasn't all that worried. Usually, if I felt the need to call her back, I'd just clap my hands and she'd come running to my side, so I continued my walk. I could still hear her steps crunching in the distance, but when I got cold, I was immediately ready to go home. I don't do well with cold temperatures, so I started clapping my hands. She returns as usual, but as soon as I hook her leash on, there's another clapping somewhere off in the distance. No one moved a single muscle, neither of us. But she had her attention dead set in one direction. My flashlight didn't light the space far enough for me to see, but I could tell she had spotted the intruder. The clap came again, and this time her hackles raised, and I took several steps to leave, but she wouldn't move. My throat was dry and my heart was beating so hard I could feel it thumping all the way to the tips of my toes. By the fourth tug, I was practically choking her. I think I was on the verge of shitting myself, to be honest. So when she snapped her attention to me and bolted, I almost sobbed with relief. I don't think I could have lived with myself if I was forced to leave her there, nor do I think I would have had the heart to. We would have just died together. No sooner than another round of clap sound, we're sprinting through the woods like the ground is about to collapse beneath our feet. It was the longest run I've ever experienced in my life, and my stamina was absolute shit back then, so I was winded after mere seconds, and my chest burned from an upcoming asthma attack. I made it home in record time, though, and when I burst through the door, my family looked at me as if I had lost my fucking mind, but I couldn't breathe in enough air to talk. I'd been taken off the asthma pump years ago due to the complete lack of problems. Doctors believed I was almost asthma-free, so it took me 45 minutes for my breathing to even out enough to get out a few words. I didn't walk her in the woods at night anymore. As a matter of fact, I didn't walk her at all without someone else with me. Next time, I might actually shit myself, so I'd like to avoid a next time altogether. P.S. Turns out it was a homeless man camped out there. He was known to harass people and was later arrested for sexual assault. I went on a mountain hike in Transylvania with a group of friends from school, and way up, after maybe 12 or 14 kilometers of trekking, we saw a house. It was in the middle of nowhere. It had a barn with a few animals, couple of cows, chickens, etc. As we get closer, we see a few people, a guy and 5 to 6 women. Not sure if there were more inside. The dude comes to greet us, barely speaking the language, and we had a hard time understanding what he was trying to say. They lived without electricity, gas, or anything. This was in the early 90s, so there's no internet, mobile phones to worry about. At least for most people, that is. Anyway, they all looked weird, kind of dumb expressions on their face. We can barely understand each other. They asked us who's the president now, and if we want some milk. They look at our clothes and shoes weirdly, curious, like who knows when was the last time they had human contact. Or maybe there were more of those crazies around these parts, I don't know. Not sure to this day what was going on, to be honest. It's not typical in the region, so we kind of just freaked out, especially because the dude looked a bit disturbed, and we were way too young to be messing around with that. We were looking around to see if there's any more of them, thinking there must be a village nearby, and paranoia was getting to us. What was also weird is that all the women kept their distance, and they never got close to us. Like he was guarding them or checking us out if it was safe for them. One of my friends kept saying we don't want their milk and we needed to go because it was getting dark. We walked calmly for a while, and then when we thought we were out of their sight, bolted like crazy out of there. Needless to say, we camped after a few hours, and we always had one person awake to keep watch. We told people that were living in the villages near that area about the mountain people, and they didn't believe us. They said nobody lives there, up in the mountains. A little over 18 years ago, I had just gotten out of the military. I drove all the way from Louisiana to my hometown in Montana without incident. I spent a few days at home and then got back on the road because my new home destination was Boise, Idaho. It was February, so instead of going straight down the length of the state, I cut across the panhandle of Idaho into Washington. The highway going straight down through the state is really twisty and very dangerous in the winter. It was a Sunday, and it was very, very early in the morning. As cliché as this sounds, there was quite a bit of fog in the air. I had been driving for a while and I really had to use the bathroom. Now normally, given how I was just out in the middle of nowhere, I would normally just have pulled over on the side of the road and took a whiz, but since it was so foggy and hard to see, I thought it was safer to just wait until I hit the next small town. So I drove for maybe 5 more miles, and I started seeing signs for a town. I can't remember for the life of me the name of the town, but I think it was Linden or Linder or something like that. It was on I-90 going into Spokane Valley. So I head towards the sign, which was a right turn off the interstate, and it's a short drive up this road, and I reached the town. It was small, but I thought nothing of it since I was from a small town in Montana anyway. Now, here's where things start to get odd. There was not a single person to be found. There were cars and businesses, but not a single person to be found. No one walking the street, no one logging trucks or driving around. It was just still as the air. I stopped at a gas station. It was one of those one-and-all places that did car repair, tires, etc., but no one was at the counter. I thought, well, maybe it's just really early. So I went around to the side to see if the bathroom was locked, and it was, of course. As I made my way back around to the front of the building, I saw a delivery truck. It was one of those Coke Classic trucks, except it wasn't moving. Its headlights were on the hazard lights, and the passenger and driver's side doors were open, just sitting there in the middle of the street. Yes, I was getting a bad vibe, so I got back in the car and went back the way I came, and I got back to I-90 and thought again about just pissing on the side of the road, but honestly I was too afraid at that point. Once I reached Spokane, I looked on the map to where I was at that point. I didn't have GPS on my phone or anything like that yet, and I couldn't find it at all on the map. Not for the life of me. Even as I'm writing this now, I looked on Google Maps and nothing by the name of Linden or Linder had appeared on the map. I still to this day will never forget that feeling or just freaky displacement I felt there. When I did eventually get to Boise, I told my friend about it, and he thought I was just trying to rip off some Silent Hill or Resident Evil stuff, and honestly I can't blame people for saying that. But at the same time, that was the reason I wouldn't piss on the side of the road. I kept recalling the part in Resident Evil 1 where the hikers were killed by those murderous dogs. Ugh. Anyway, if you stuck around this long, thanks for reading. And if you know of a town on Highway 2 between Coeur d'Alene, Idaho and Spokane, Washington, People, let me know. This was quite a few years ago now, but me and my friend had this really cool spot to hang out in the woods. You had to walk in the middle of a creek for a kilometer and duck through some sharp bushes and thistles. The hike was really well rewarding though. The spot was about half an acre big. It was pure green grass on an incline with beautiful clear water ponds everywhere. There was tons of wildlife and the butterflies lived there, so there were always lots of those too. So my story begins on the way to this place. My friend Levi and I were walking along the river on the way to the spot. It was in the middle of a valley and nobody ever else went down there. Suddenly, Levi stopped moving and ducked into a bush. I did the same because I thought there must have been some large animal somewhere. I saw him staring up the hill, and so I looked up too. There were two people standing at the top of the hill, heaving back and forth a lifeless body. We watched as if they threw the lifeless corpse down the hill and it bounced off the trees and eventually got stuck on a tree at the bottom. Then they just took off. Me and him were terrified, and I was shaking so badly I couldn't speak, so we decided to verify it was a real body. Levi got about 4 feet away before screaming, "It has nostrils! It's real! Run!" So of course we take off running, and I glance back to see those two people run back to the top of the hill. Me and him ran 2 kilometers through thick bush and trees just to get away from them. The next day we were with his parents driving to town, and we saw like 10 fire trucks at the school closest to the forest. Terrified, we told his parents, bawling our eyes out, worried that they were going to get murdered. His mom started laughing and said to us, "They were training for a search and rescue. That was a dummy that the firemen had to find." I never slept as good as I did that night. My boyfriend and I were backpacking through rural Tasmania a few years ago. While on a bus, we were discussing our plans for the next 2 weeks. The girl in the seat in front of us turns around and offers us a place to stay in her town. We declined as we were headed somewhere else first, but she gave us her mobile number and said that she and her partner would love to have us. A few days later, we decided to take them up on their offer. I call her and she says they're happy to host us. So far, so good. They meet us at the train station and immediately something feels off. It's really difficult to explain, but it's that primal feeling you get in your guts that tells you that something isn't right. We ignored our guts and followed them instead. They lead us straight out of town. We ask them where we're going, and they say that they live on the outskirts, in the woods. This town is creepy as fuck. It's an old mining town that had been largely abandoned, and as we walk the 15-odd minutes to their home, the houses get shittier, sparser, with boarded-up windows, overgrown gardens, and no people in sight. Eventually, we reach the house at the very end of the town, and it's their house. We go in. Set up in the middle of the living room is a single mattress with a sheet hanging around it. They show us around the house, except for one door which always stayed closed. When I asked what was behind it, they pretended not to hear me. Our room has a made bed, chest of drawers, and looks like a normal room. It seems weird that they sleep on mattresses in the living room when they have a guest room. We go back into the living room and look around. Knives. Lots and lots of knives. My boyfriend asks if they go hunting. No. The partner hands one of the knives to my boyfriend and asks him to open it. It's a massive fucking Bowie knife and what looks like blood stained around the edges of the blade. My boyfriend laughs awkwardly and sets it down. They have a tattoo gun, quote-unquote, to practice. My boyfriend asks if they have any tattoos. No. There's a small axe at the door. I ask if they collect wood. No. Suddenly, the guy says he wants to go to the shops. We quickly agree because we're creeped out and want to get back into the town. The 4 of us leave and they start walking in the opposite direction of the town. I say that the town is back the other way. The guy says this way would be more interesting because it goes up through the trees. He says that they have never been up to the mountain before, but he knows the area and it would take the same amount of time. I tell my boyfriend that I'm freaking out, but he thinks it's okay, so we follow them into the trees. The path goes up into the mountain, and now we're going in the total opposite direction of the town. The girl turns around to her partner and whispers, "So where was the place again?" My boyfriend and I freeze. I say I want to take the road back to town and start walking. When the four of us arrive in the one shop in town, no one recognizes the couple, and this is a really small town. We make an excuse that we want to go look at the sights and that we'll catch up with them later, and instead book a hotel room and freak out. I did some snooping in the area, and their house had an extra room behind the mystery door and a basement. The path that we were taking led straight out of town and up into the mountain. There was no way it could loop back into town. So yeah, pretty sure we were narrowly avoided being murdered. Or maybe they were just massive weirdos. To be honest, the creepiest thing was the fact that there was no drug paraphernalia at all. The state of the house and the weird behavior would have been understandable if they were intoxicated, but that wasn't the case. In Auburn, Alabama in 2008. It was Halloween and we Googled haunted houses. I can't remember what the website looked like or if there even was one, but it was like a 45-minute drive away. I know that it wasn't like a big attraction, and we figured it was someone's land and would be like a local deal. We drive out there at like 10 p.m. This was before iPhones and GPS, so we had MapQuest directions printed out. We ended up going down a pretty country road for a while with no street lights, then turned down a legit dirt road that went through the woods. It was pitch black at this point. We went down that road for like 10 minutes and finally saw an old house with a sign by the driveway that was handwritten and said, "Haunted House." No other cars or lights or people anywhere. We pulled in the driveway and sat there for a second like, alright, this is already sort of fucked up. We should just leave. All of a sudden, an old pickup truck turned on about 15 feet in front of us, facing us, light shining down in our faces. It started driving towards us, and we backed out and peeled out immediately. It followed us, like almost bumping our rear end, right on our tail down this pitch-black dirt road in the middle of the Alabama woods. We were flipping our shit at this point. It was like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or The Hills Have Eyes stuff. He stayed on our tail, blinding us and almost bumping us all the way back home until we got off our exit and finally let us go. We have no idea who was driving. I always think what would have happened if we got out of the car when we were in that driveway. I was probably about 14 or so on a camping trip with my scout troop out in the middle of nowhere. We literally hiked into the woods for about 40 miles and set up camp. No phones, no way of contacting the outside, just us and some of our parents fishing and hiking. Anyways, second night into the trip, my dad, myself, and 2 other parents are sitting around the campfire talking and getting into the subject of UFOs. We start talking about different stories we'd seen on TV shows and such. Right in the middle of a story, my friend's dad points up at the sky and goes, "Holy shit, what's that?" We thought he was joking around for a good minute till he goes, "Seriously, turn around, there's more." We all turn around finally and see 3 massive, and I mean fucking massive, fireballs screaming down from the sky towards the earth. They look like they're going in slow motion, or maybe time just seemed to slow down, but it took forever for them to disappear behind the tree line. Naturally, we all freaked out and started talking about what it could be, but there was no way of actually finding out for at least 3 more days. The hike out of the woods was the worst. Just walking quietly, contemplating what could be waiting, and what the world might be like if our worst fears happened while we were in there. It turns out a Russian satellite had broken up and fallen to Earth that night, and it was seen for miles and miles. It was still the creepiest 3 days of my life. This was a small town in a relatively rural area. A few years after the fact, I'm now relatively certain it was a skinwalker. About 10 years ago, I was at my dad's house for the weekend in Kentucky. The Appalachian people are very superstitious, hailing from the Scots-Irish people and just never losing that side of them. My dad wasn't superstitious, I thought, and was not one to be easily scared. It was about, 10 at night, and we randomly decided to go into town to get some McDonald's. Daddy always insisted on walking in front of me, and I always assumed it was so I wouldn't accidentally step on a snake. But now I don't think that's the case. So he turned on the porch light and opened the screen door. He had put 1 foot on the porch, and there was this god-awful sound. I will never forget it in my life. There was a screech followed by the sound of a crow, but it wasn't a crow. The best way I can describe it is if it was a person mimicking a crow call. My hair stood up on the back of my neck, and my dad retreated into the house. He slammed the big door and locked it, something I had never seen him do. Before I could ask a question, he said, "It isn't safe. We can go tomorrow morning." And so we did, but the rest of the night we stayed inside. My dad didn't even go outside to smoke a cigarette. He even let the outside dogs stay inside the house. We never talked about that again, but that was one of the scariest moments of my life. When I was younger, I went elk hunting with my uncle and some of his friends, and had an experience I'll never forget. One of the days, I went on a hunt with his buddy Tyler. Tyler gets an elk down about 30 minutes before dark. We get over to it, and as we are cleaning it, we started hearing wolves howl in the distance, slowly getting closer. Every minute that passes, the smell of death gets thicker, the sky gets darker, and the wolves get closer. At this point, it's dark now. All I can see is what's directly in the beam of my mini mag light and Tyler's hatbill light as he works on the elk as fast as he can, while I keep watch on the wolves. We're surrounded. I don't know how many wolves there were, but it felt like dozens. It was probably only a few, but I could hear them running circles around us and yelping back and forth to each other. Occasionally, I caught the sight of them in the light, and then they were gone again. Every once in a while, one would get brave and dart in within a few feet and try snagging a piece of the elk. Finally, the elk is cleaned, and we have the scent circle around the carcass to keep it somewhat safe. Now all that was left was a 3-mile hike back to camp, completely covered in blood and being trailed by wolves. By far the most horrifying experience of my life. In southwest Georgia, in the dense hardwoods around 8 miles out of the town of Attapulgos, I had a pretty disturbing encounter. I was around 16 years old, about 5 years ago, and my dad and I went hunting. We always climbed different trees anywhere from 1 mile to 4 miles apart. We did this so that maybe if we startled any deer, they'd wander towards the other hunter. Anyway, as I was climbing the tree with my tree lounge, I heard something below me, about 30 yards out. It sounded like twigs cracking, so I stopped and looked behind me just to see the dense woods. I figured it was just a small critter, like a squirrel or something. About half an hour later, I'm settled in my tree, and the sun is starting to peek through the leaves. It's no longer in the twilight of dawn, and it's now becoming morning. As I'm sitting in my comfy stand, I notice a palmetto bush. Normally this isn't anything odd, but the fact that I noticed it threw me off. Why did I notice it? I sat and stared and couldn't figure out what it was that caught my eye. A palmetto bush looks like the top of a palm tree that sits on the ground, and has a few sort of hairs and tails that stick up and produce some pretty tasty berries. Well, I couldn't figure it out, so I kept scanning the area. A couple hours pass, and I keep noticing this damn bush. Why? Why is it so spectacular all of a sudden? It's a damn bush, damn it. A normal palmetto bush. Whatever. I kept on hunting for those deer. Around 11 p.m., my pa rings me on the pager. Says he wants to walk to what we called the honey hole, a good hunting location full of deer around this time. It has a little stream, plenty of cover for them, and plenty of sneaky passages for us. Okay, Pa, I'll meet you there. As I begin packing up, I notice the twigs snapping again. It came from that damn bush. So I look, and I figured out what it was that stood out so much. There was a man staring at me through the bush. He had a scraggly-ass beard, a tan coat, and some jumper suit pants on. He had a hood up that was the color of the bush. Not only that, he had covered his face in mud, a common hunting camouflage technique. Noticing this, I grab my Remington and point it towards the ground near the man. As soon as I did this, he let out a terrifying cackle and darted towards the direction of the creek, around 150 yards away from my tree. I watched him through my scope, and I could hear him and see him cackling the whole way. And the scariest part? He leapt across the creek about 9 feet wide, in a single fucking jump. I wasn't as scared as I was disturbed. I had a rifle, a damn good one too, 6-round capacity, bolt action. I've never missed a shot on any animal with my rifle, so I felt safe and confident in my skills and equipment. But even then, it was strange as hell. The land was a public hunting club's land, which is why I didn't shoot him. I got down and continued to the honey hole, where I told Pa about the situation. Anyhow, we kept hunting the location in the future after the incident, and I never saw him again. I told the club about him, and nobody had heard anything like it. But about 3 months later, he was spotted by someone else who was also using the tree climber stands. They said they had been hunting a specific hunting site in a certain tree for a couple days at a time. One morning at dawn, they climbed into the tree, and after getting settled in, they saw something eye level out their corner of their eye. When they looked, it was the same description of the man I saw, but he was in an adjacent tree hanging upside down like a sloth, staring at them. If you really think about this, this is about 20 feet up. When they spotted him and threatened to shoot him, he cackled and climbed down the tree very quickly in a matter of a few seconds. He dashed off into the planted pines behind the guy, and that was the last that they had heard of the weirdo. So yeah, long story, but disturbing as hell. I was out on the coast in the Pacific Northwest. You drive west through the mountains, hit the coast, and drive Highway 101, and it has just the most gorgeous collection of habitats. You can be on sea cliffs, or near tidal pools, or in the coastal pines with ferns the size of small cars, or areas that get swallowed up by the Pacific that have little microbiomes inside the felled trees, and you can see the natural battle for high ground. Areas in which ferns and fungi are more prevalent than any animal, emerald groves dotted with little emitum mushrooms, these little ruby and gold nuggets standing out against the reddish-brown pine needles. For the most part, out here you're safe. Being keenly aware of your surroundings should keep you from disappearing, and using a walking stick will save you from a broken leg or a fall, all of which are very real dangers. There's big cats and bear and elk and moose, but so long as you're not stupid and you stay aware, you're gonna be okay. But every now and then, a new large cat warning sign goes up for a few weeks. A no new poaching sign appears for a while, etc. If you travel through enough of it, you'll find the meth labs and hobo huts, and those really are the most dangerous animals you're going to run into. It's early in the season, and I'm on this spit, which by December is just nailed by waves and disappears into storms. Part of it was engineered for this, and the main path has little hills on the left and right sides, so the whole path is effectively a massive game trail that's always the first thing to flood. The wildlife chill at the very open end area at the sea, and every now and again a cat will chase a deer up and make a kill, then drag it off to the sides. You'll sometimes see marks of a struggle, but more often just remains off path. The sea and I are very familiar with each other here. But just this one night, man. It was getting dark and I'm at the open wildlife area thinking how I gotta get back to the car. I checked my flashlights, but I had burned through them 12 to 16 hours earlier in the pre-dawn hours. I check the comforting rhythmic lights of the two landmark and triangulate where I am and tuck that away. I put the lights away, and I figure if I can't find my way back in the dark, then I don't belong out there at this hour ever again. I'm slowly walking back, keeping a steady and committed pace, but not running or making myself a prey target. But something just wasn't right. I text my wife and let her know I'm okay, just a little freaked out, but I'll be back at my car when signal returns in 60 minutes. The faint glow of my cell was the last light I'd see. Something was wrong. I felt like I was being followed, but thought my nerves got the better of me. I heard some snapping twigs and rustling, and all the wildlife waking up or going to sleep. All of this was normal, until it wasn't. I thought I'd heard whispers, but knew it was just the whispers of the wind over the water and splash on the rocks and animals going to sleep. I reached for my phone and realized I'd have no signal and it would just give me away, so I get back to it. I get maybe 20 feet and there it is again. I didn't see any bear or elk or anything, and if it was a large cat, I'd never heard or see it coming. If it was a deer, it'd be stumbly-bumbly loud, but then I hear a snap. More like a thok. And this was no tiny twig, so whatever it wasn't small. I keep thinking, it's a person. It's a person. Someone has seen me out here, and either wants my gear and cash, or to kill me. I make it in the final half-mile stretch, and by now I'm sure I would have been attacked if it was an animal. I see the faint not nature parking lot in the sanked moonlight, and could hit it with my light if it worked. I spin around thinking, fuck it, I can bolt because it's definitely a person or people, and I'm better off defending myself than I am just being attacked. I break out my phone and shine it down this looming corridor of coast, the trees flanking the path, hugging the light, and kind of holding it in. Nothing. I let out a sigh of relief. Snap. Again, but behind me now. So whatever it was made its way around to me. It's close. A deer takes off in the sedge, and I hear more and more snaps and shuffling, and branches catching on jackets, and it hits me, and I put two and two together. They're trying to get me before I can get to the car. This thought goes through my head, and I worry it's the last thought I'll ever have. I move off the path one would anticipate and try to skirt around the whole situation because, hey, maybe it's just me freaking out, man. I cut through the sedge and wild berries and get some distance and cut back through the main trailhead parking lot. I had seen no people all morning or day or evening, which was odd because there's half a dozen cars and I would have seen at least one of them, right? I get to the car and fumble my keys to get in. Fire the thing up before my ass hits the seat and rip the fuck out of there. Behind me, in the light cast by the small restrooms in soft moonlight, are 7 or 8 males. Some are still running at the car but slowing down as I put distance between us. I saw the faint soft silvery glint of blades in some of their hands and one machete, and the rest had sticks or other blunt types of objects. I don't know what the fuck they wanted, but they wanted it really bad. I've been hiking out there for years, and I won't be going back.